Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about the Pitt Season 1 Episode 8. This is the hour of 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. This is a Patreon sponsored review, so thank you very much to Alison for picking the show. So this one, obviously there's lots of little things. There usually is kind of these little like tail-offs and smaller D and E plots in these episodes, but I think this one more than any so far has felt like it's had like three really focused central plots. I mean, really two, and then one's kind of just kind of the little capper and all the storyline with the young guy who died, Nick, and his parents, and the episode all builds up to like his leaving ceremony, if you want to call it that, because he's going to be a donor, and a lot of friends and family are around, a lot of the staff stand around and sort of send them off, and it's this kind of heartfelt goodbye. It really feels like that plot line which has been running since episode 2, maybe it was even episode 1. I think it was episode 2, but like it's been several episodes of them making their decisions, and ultimately they're going to agree to let him be a donor, and that's what wraps these things up. And the episode ends with like a kind of a somber looking look on Robbie's face. But I think there's two main plots this episode focuses on that really stick out. Like I say, there's a couple of little other things, but the two main things, and they're very wisely placed together in this episode, in that one of them is very sad. One of them is about a little girl who is drowned, and she's basically already knocking on death's door when she arrives at the hospital, and everything they're doing to try and bring her back is, they're trying their best. They've got a process to go through and whatnot. They're going to heat her up. They have to heat her up before they can try shocking her, so on and so on. And they talk us through this process quite well, and we spend a lot of time with the sister of this young girl, the grandmother who feels responsible because she was supposed to be watching her, and then eventually the parents come in, and all of it, as you'd imagine, is a very sad, miserable story where everyone's kind of realizing that this child is dead. And I think the scene in particular where Robbie sits down and sort of explains to the parents that they're about to stop trying hit particularly hard. That wasn't the only hard-hitting scene with it either, to be fair. There was a scene where King goes to speak to the sister, and the sister starts talking about how, like, the girl who drowned actually jumped in to save her, and succeeded in doing so, but then couldn't get out herself. So there's this sort of sacrificial element to it, which makes it even sadder and sweet and all the rest of it. And King, who we know has a sister who she cares for, actually leaves the room, like kind of gets emotional and goes out. She comes back pretty quickly, but it did feel like in the moment it got a bit too personal, a bit too much for her. And this is maybe, like a lot of the scenarios we've been seeing, Whittaker losing that patient several episodes ago, kind of the same thing, where they're experiencing a lot of these types of conversations and a lot of these scenarios for the first time, given that they're still students, they're still in training effectively. So I think that moment really stuck out, and it stuck out quite well because it felt like they'd set this up. We've had her talk about her sister, and not only have we had her talk about her sister, we actually, one of the other little plots in the episode is a capper to the missing daughter, right? The woman who left her old mother and might have abandoned her for an episode or two, right? Turns out, and this is both a little funny but also sad, right? Because it further adds to this idea that she is overworked and that she does need a break. But it turns out she just fell asleep in the car when she went to move the car. She's not actually went anywhere. She was sitting outside sleeping the whole time. And it's this extra thing. And they sit down with the social services lady and talk about that there is certain things available to them, X number of hours per week of help, some place where you can leave your mother for, like an old folks home, not permanently, but for like, you can take her there for a couple hours for lunch if you have to go and do something or that kind of thing. They talk through all the I didn't take down all the details, but it was very much, no, there is some help available. You should make use of whatever is available. And like that kind of like really, lightens things for her, right? The daughter character. And I think the sweetest part of that scene actually is the fact that the mother kind of is the one that jumps in and says, yeah, I think my daughter could use a break. Because it felt like up until that point, she was kind of I don't know if oblivious is the right word, but certainly it didn't see, like, it felt like she always just expected her daughter to do things, and not that the old lady was a monster. It was just kind of this natural expectation she seemed to keep having. It was actually very nice for her to be the one to turn around and say, yeah, she needs a break sometimes, like, she's always looking after me. Having that acknowledged to the daughter, I think, was a big deal for the daughter's character. Almost as much as actually having help offered, like, almost as much as the promise of, no, there's going to be help coming. You're going to get a little bit of a break. It's not just a burden on you anymore. I think hearing the mother acknowledge, yeah, I'm kind of working, like, you're working too hard because of me. Like, her acknowledging that, I feel like is almost as equal to it. So, I think that's a good scene. But the reason why I was bringing that plot in now and talking about this scene with King and the little girl is that I think that entire plot tied in to her talking about her sister. You know, back in the previous episode when she was talking to the daughter about getting help, she talked about the sort of help that she got in taking care of her sister. So having this plot line here not only is a capper to its own thing, but it also reminds us all of King's relationship and history with her sister. So when the little girl starts talking about her sister, and now her sister's gone, and she's like, oh, is my sister going to be okay? And, you know, the doctors are trying to fix her. That kind of thing, and King gets emotional. It's not just it can work in the abstract. It can work because, you know, it's not hard to understand that someone has a sibling, and you know, in a different context, this could be the introduction to finding out she has a sister, and then we'd explore the relationship from there. You know, something has to raise it in the first place. But in this case, this is a payoff. This is enhanced because we already know she has a close relationship to her sister. We saw her call her sister. We've seen all these things series throughout the episodes. So that in this moment, as soon as that little girl starts talking about her sister and what her sister did for her, you know it's affecting King. Like, it's like the writers have already set up the language for the audience. They've already put in the groundwork. So this is the fruit blossoming in a good way. And by that, all I mean is you're feeling things before the show has to tell you, because it's done such a good job of setting up what the character is about. You know, to contrast that with Santos, I think it was last episode with the father who was possibly, like, you know, abusing his kid, and we kind of found out a lot about her in that. That was kind of the opposite. That was the introduction of those ideas, right? Is they sort of used it as a way to sort of reveal something about Santos, and yeah, we got a big reaction from her, which was well played. But arguably, the bigger impact from that reveal, from that backstory, might come later when something comes up where we don't have to explain to the audience why it's maybe affecting her a little bit more personally than it is other characters in the room. You know, basically, you have to have a mix. You have to match. You have to, you know, you can't do everything the exact same way. But I think there's a really nice contrast as to how they've set up these things in these two back-to-back episodes. And there's a lot of potential for this to keep going forward as well. As we know more about these characters and, like, having little payoffs to the backstory we already know about them. In fact, hell, even Javadi, you know, to skip over. This is another one of the minor plots. I haven't even got to the other main plot yet. But one of the other minor plots this episode is that there's this woman, I think she has Crohn's disease, who's yelling and saying she needs certain types of meds, and the doctors are trying to, you know, do this. I think it's Javadi, I think Santos is in there, and then I forget the lady's name, but the one who's been kind of friendly with Santos, the one Santos stabbed in the foot by accident. But they're in there, and this woman's yelling because it turns out Javadi's mother is her actual doctor, and that's who she wants to see, but she's in an operation or something right now. She can't come down. And she's like yelling, no, she knows what I need to get. I need this, I need that. And they're going on and on and on and on, and, you know, they call Javadi's mother. She says, give her this, this, this. Ultimately, though, Javadi gets this time to shine where she basically figures out, by asking the patient, like, what she'd done that day and when the pain had started, she basically ends up doing a bit of detective work and finds a spider bite on her foot, and then finds a dead black widow in her shoe, and is like, no, this is not really anything to do with what you usually come to the hospital for. This is not your disease. This is something specific that's happened to you today, and I'm going to give you this thing. And we get this interesting little moment where Javadi's mother comes in and gets really kind of, like, all pissy about, wait, what are you giving her? I didn't authorize that. I didn't ask that. And it turns out that Javadi is right. She is correct, because immediately the patient's like, whatever you just gave me, it's working, I'm feeling better. And the mother doesn't even say immediately, good job, Javadi. She's like, oh, maybe it is. And she's like, no, it is. I feel better. Like, the patient's making it clear that her daughter just like solved the case and done it without her mom's help. So it's kind of this like mix of like getting to show her mom up a little bit. There's a little bit of satisfaction in that. So that's kind of fun. Especially the way she storms into the room. You get to enjoy the eating of crow a little bit when Javadi's figured all this out. So that was a nice little moment. And again, it works because this relationship between her her mom being really expecting and demanding of her skills. This feels like a nice natural kind of counter scene to that one from like an episode or two ago where she was kind of like trying to quiz her in front of the patient and embarrassing her, effectively. So this was a nice kind of like a little comeuppance for that. And not like a mean comeuppance, just like a nice little bit of karma. It's like, hey, you made her a little bit uncomfortable in that scene. She's sort of returned the favor, and not even intentionally. So you can't even look at Javadi as being, spiteful or anything. She didn't intentionally try and show her mother up. She just did a good job, and it naturally did that. So we get to enjoy it without the character being a little bit of a dick about it. So yeah, there you go. That's like a nice little subplot. I know it's funny how I said this had like 3 focused plots, and then I keep pivoting into these little plots off to the side. But anyway, so yeah, one main plot is the girl who's drowning, very sad all the way throughout. And the natural counterbalance to this, and this is not an accident, is that one of the other main plots of this episode is very feel good. It's a very happy story where we get to just enjoy the characters feeling good about something. And that is this older man who's got a pacemaker. Something's not quite right with it, and they're checking him out. And there's some operating stuff where they're trying to like figure out how to help his heart without the pacemaker. He's going to need a new one. The cables have disconnected, whatever. But the real meat of this story is that a couple times this old man who kind of has dementia, he does occasionally say a couple things that are like medical, right? He says something about what they're giving him, or says, oh, that sounds right, or he says a couple of things where Langdon eventually stops and says, wait, are you a doctor? He keeps saying things that make sense to me. And when the guy's son shows up, Robbie says hi, says where he is, but then he sort of says, hey, by the way, like, what was your dad's profession? Like, what did he do for a living? And he's like, oh, he was a postal worker. Oh, did he ever volunteer at a hospital? And he's like, no, but he did volunteer, and forgive me if I'm misremembering the name of this, but I think it was the Freedom House Ambulance Service. And this is, so for me, this is like this is educational, this next part of the plot, where immediately Robbie's super impressed by this, and so is Evans, and eventually they end up all sitting around the old man, like, telling some of his stories, and we find out that his pacemaker disconnected because he keeps fiddling with it, he keeps touching it through his skin, and it's his own fault. But yeah, we find out this was like a volunteer ambulance service, because there wasn't, I mean, they basically just straight up say there wasn't a 911 service at the time in the 60s, and a bunch of men, black men specifically, including this guy, just did it because it was a good idea, and it was such a good idea that eventually it was taken by the government and then turned into like what we all think of as calling for an ambulance and so on. At least that was the gist of it from what they were saying. This is wild to me in a lot of ways, just because it's hard to imagine a time before you just dial a 3-digit number and get the response. And obviously this is specifically American. I don't know, like I genuinely don't know. Did the UK already have like a number to call and get an ambulance before then? Was it adopted because America did it first, and it was such a good idea that everyone started doing it? I don't know. But it is wild to think about a time before you could just dial a 3-digit number for emergencies and get, emergency care, get someone to come out to you immediately. I mean, obviously, if you go back far enough, it makes sense it doesn't exist because phones didn't exist. But I mean, the 60s seems a little late, honestly, when I think about it. Like, I'm like, so how did it work before then? This is the sort of thing that I don't think comes up that much, all that often in media. And even though I watch old movies, I don't necessarily I think about it, I guess you just call the hospital and say, hey, I'm sick. You call your doctor, and your doctor arranges for transportation or something, I guess. But it was nice to hear about this, and there was this thing that was just kind of done because it needed to happen by a bunch of good-meaning people, and they bring up a little bit of the injustice of it been taken away from them. But like Robbie and the rest of them treat him like he's a hero. I mean, that's the word he uses basically. I think he says legend even at one point. So I mean, this is just a feel-good story, and it's very much meant to counterbalance the other side of what this episode's offering, which is very sad or dark. And dark's the third story, which I've not gotten to yet. Well, potentially dark. We don't know for sure if it's going down the dark path yet, but yeah, I mean, honestly, yeah, there was very little to say about this beyond just the feel-good nature of it. It felt like and obviously there's one element that I've not even mentioned yet about tying into Robbie. But, it was interesting hearing about this. It's always good to understand some of this stuff a little bit better, and this is a good example of a TV show being able to teach you a little bit about history. Now, obviously, it's not a documentary. It's not going to be entirely factual. But, I don't really... But broadly speaking, I'm sure this character himself is fictional, but broadly speaking, the idea of what they're talking about here is based in truth, and I feel like I learned something a little bit because of it. The other part, though, of course, is that this old guy knows the doctor that Robbie's having PTSD over, or didn't know him, I should say, because he's been dead for a while. But he even says, where is he? Where's Dr. Is it Adamson? Forgive me. I feel like they bring his name up every so often, but because he's not like a character in the IMDb list, I can't just check it easily. But he brings him up, and Robbie is immediately like, oh no, he passed away. And even the first time he brings his name up, Robbie like sort of stops dead and gives him a stare. And I think what's kind of interesting about the way they've handled this plot here is that Robbie has been very cut off and like, very sheltered, and like sort of he's closed up anytime this subject comes up. He doesn't want to talk about it. He rolls his eyes, he walks away from the conversations, and he just, goes on with his day. This plot line basically forces him to actually kind of interact with it a little bit. And because this guy isn't just someone who works for him that he can kind of pull rank on and walk away, or even, I mean, forget the working part. I mean, it's just not someone that he knows. Like, I feel like with the others, with Colin says, hey, should you be here today? And he's like, of course I should be. Why are you asking me that? Like, he gets snippy with them, right? Because he's deflecting. With this guy, though, he can't do that. It would be cruel, especially since he's this kind old man who's like, not even that all there, right? Because he's got dementia. So he's kind of forced to just say a few things out loud, which works well for the audience. We kind of already knew that this guy died during COVID, but having him just say this out loud and say that he was a good man and that he listened to his talks and he was a great teacher and all the rest of it, it felt almost like a little bit therapeutic to have him be forced to say that in this context. And it being tied to this sort of like positive character and this positive overall message, it felt like a really good way of bringing some of that out. And it kind of, it helps with like some of the other moments in the episode. At the end of the episode, when he's watching the car go away with Nick, it does kind of feel like some of this is weighing on him a little bit. Like he's really thinking about mortality. And what this means to these people. He's able to humanize with them a little bit better, perhaps, because he's thinking about the people he's lost. So, no, I mean, I really have no complaints or faults with how it handles any of that stuff. And before I go to the third plot, I should mention Collins, because Robbie does catch her. So, at the end of the last episode, of course, she was, what was the correct way of saying this? She had blood in her stool. I'll say it that way. I don't know if, like, I feel like there's maybe a better word for it, but like, possibly having a miscarriage. And she seems to think that's the case. But she's a doctor. She goes to check. She gets to the sonogram machine and starts looking at her own stomach. And Robbie catches her. He comes in and sees what she's doing, and he kind of tries to talk to her a couple times throughout the rest of the episode, but keeps not quite been able to, because they keep getting interrupted because they're so goddamn busy. And Collins, I mean, I said about how Robbie was clearly affected by what was going on in this episode and how it affected his plot. But I think it's obviously the same true for Collins. Collins in the room with the girl who's dying, the drowning victim. Like, she's watching a kid die, and it's clearly making her think about the fact that she's effectively losing a child. So, like, that's there as well. I don't really have too much more to say about it, other than she just looks, she looks deeply affected by it throughout the entire episode, and it's like she's definitely not entirely all there the entire time. There's even another little side plot of a guy who comes in that's cut the tip of his finger off. He got crushed under something when he was working. And they're making some jokes. I think Mackay's in there, as well as one of the young characters. I can't remember which one. But they're working on his finger, and like, oh, we're going to have to shave off a little bit of bone, and like sort of plastic surgery at the end of it, so your finger's going to be a bit shorter. They're not actually giving him plastic surgery. I think they said they're doing a plastic surgery trick. I think there's basically just a way to close off the skin at the end. But it's going to be shorter than the rest of his fingers, and his nail's going to outgrow it a little bit, and so on. But the guy's making jokes, and he kind of starts flirting with Collins a little bit, and like Mackay's sort of noticing and giving like a little glance over, and Collins, when she's left alone with this guy, where the others have to go and get something for whatever reason, he tries to just, and again, he's very pleasant, like he's not, like I say, he is just flirting in the most innocent way possible, and he can tell that she's kind of upset about something, so she's like, hey, are you okay? Is it a bad day or something? And she just kind of makes a reason to leave, or she hears something and has to go. But she's, again, not that I never thought this was going to lead to anything, but I think the idea of a potential new partner trying to interact with her on this day with this bad news that she is currently going through alone and not telling anyone, feels like it's further just prodding. Like, everything in the day's work is either reminding her of children or romantic relationships kind of thing. So yeah, does that. Anyway, so the other plot that I've not talked about yet, the third of the three pillars, if you will, of this episode, is Mackay gets a patient, a young woman who's talking about pain, just somewhere down below, basically. I don't know if she probably gets more specific than that, but I don't remember. But there's a weird vibe to this, because she's here with her boss, which is another woman who's a bit older, but not that old. And it's just kind of weird and fishy, because like every time like Mackay asks a question, this other woman, the boss character, chimes in and answers for her. The young woman she's treating, the patient, doesn't have her own phone, but the boss says she can use mine if she needs to. We find out later she's staying at her place. It all feels a bit. This is the thing where I didn't know what it was hinting at, honestly, during this scene. But I think everyone watching this scene feels the vibes are off, and you very definitely can tell that Mackay is concerned. Like, the way she's kind of like taking in the answers and pausing and glancing back and forth. You can tell that her gears are going and that something's throwing up red flags, which is literally the phrase she uses when she goes to talk to others in a minute. She says there's some red flags here. But I didn't know what red flags were for. I thought, was this some sort of weird controlling relationship? I thought it was like a really controlling romantic relationship where there's this slightly older woman who's taken her in and is like controlling every part of her life to an unhealthy degree. So I was thinking kind of like an emotional abuse kind of thing, I guess. There's something in that realm as this scene was playing out. But when Mackay goes to Robbie and Evans and says, hey, I've got some concerns here, and basically, describes the situation and tells the audience and them that these are red flags for possible sex trafficking. And I was like, wait, what? Jeez. And obviously it makes sense that, there's certain signs for some of these things that they would notice as doctors because they're seeing so many patients, they've seen it before, so on and so on. But I was like, oh, wow, okay. My mind did not jump to that. But then I sort of thought about, everything that we'd heard and what she was talking about before, thinking about all those little red flags in the previous scene, and I'm like, okay, I can see how this translates to that. I can see how this idea of this girl does not have control of anything herself. She's relying on someone else. And immediately my question was, well, does she know that is this the sort of thing where she's being groomed to eventually be given to someone, and this, this boss lady is this monster who's doing that? Or is she already being pimped out effectively, and that's obviously something that the other characters want to ask as well. So they basically just force a reason. They make up an excuse for this boss to not come, because she keeps hanging around. She's like, no, I'll be here for every examination. It doesn't matter how personal it is. She doesn't mind me being here. You know, it doesn't matter like how much you're stripping her and sticking things where. I'll stand right here. I'll be here. I'm supportive. But they make an excuse that there's going to be radiation from a CT scan or whatever, and that she can't come in with them. And then it's just a lie. They just get her into a different room and said, no, this is just for privacy. And they ask her some questions about her sex life, about where she's living, about, you know, and they I think they figure out she's got chlamydia, and they start asking about, you know, like how many partners have you had, so on and so on. Like, have you ever been pressured or forced into sex against your will? And they're very delicate about how they ask these questions. They're very soft-spoken. And she denies all of this, right? And she seems a little bit... Like, she seems genuinely flustered into a point, although I think that last question about being forced, there is kind of a little moment of hesitation. I guess what I'll say is that I think the actress here is doing a good job of not portraying someone who's lying. I'm kind of the opinion after this scene that she doesn't think that she is in a bad situation right now. Maybe it's one that's like, you know, maybe she is trapped and it's building to something, but maybe she's not realized it yet. It did almost feel, though, when they asked that last question, it's almost like she didn't think she'd had, maybe, but now that they're asking that question, it's making her rethink about some things maybe recently in her life or something. Like, that's the vibe I got from the performance. It felt like that pushed a kind of a nerve where she's still going to say no, because it's a lot to accept that maybe she is some kind of a victim right now, but she's maybe like, she's only maybe just via that question starting to question some stuff that's going on around her. I don't know. That was the vibe I was getting from the scene. It's a very interesting plotline because it's, you know, it's like, it's them noticing something, someone in trouble, and we've had examples of this before with the kid last episode, and you know, like I think this is a little bit different though, in that the person themselves who is potentially the victim maybe doesn't even realize to an extent that they're a victim yet, but they're already spotting the signs for like how this could go south or whatever. I'll be very curious to see where this goes, and I think what's interesting about this compared to another little plot line that's still going on that I've not mentioned yet from this episode. There's a lot of little things in this episode, but Santos' suspicion of Langdon kind of escalated this episode a little bit, where she straight up is kind of thinking that he's stealing meds, and she tries to bring up this concern, and she's shot down immediately, and rightfully so. Like, you know, like she's told, hey, you've been here for 7 hours, just do your goddamn job. Like, why? Like, Langdon's a good doctor, why are you... It does feel like she's barking up the wrong tree. It feels like the lesson for Santos, despite her effectively doing something that most people, despite the ethical way she did it, she achieved something good last episode with the way she tackled the father character, right? Most people, despite any misgivings about how she got there, a result may have been achieved. She may have helped a little girl out. So it's like, okay, like, we can't really be mad at her for that. We understand where she's coming from and we get it. But this kind of like challenging of Langdon does feel, at least I think from the audience perspective, so like misinformed, and so like it feels like youth, just like her being a young idiot and like thinking she knows everything and wanting to prove something that I don't think we, the audience, have seen any signs of. So if it does turn out that Langdon's doing something bad and she's right, I'd be very curious to how the show handles that and makes us feel like, oh shit, she was right all along. Because right now it feels like the tough lesson she's going to have to learn is that she's overstepping, that she's thinking she's the center of the story, and you know, and that's a weird way of putting that, I guess, but like, you know, it kind of ties back into like her thinking she was a hot shot and she's the young character who doesn't make mistakes. The others, you know, they've fainted, they've been squirted on, they've done whatever, right? She didn't make mistakes, but then she did, right? And it felt like, oh, maybe that should finally teach her to not be so arrogant. And it kind of feels like this is also a little bit tied into that arrogance. It's kind of like, oh, I've uncovered something. I've only been here one day, and none of this entire medical staff have ever noticed something fishy's going on with this character. it feels like she is destined to be made look like a fool. And I'm almost a little bit uncomfortable with like Langdon eventually finding out that she's even made any weird accusations and how that'll play out. Like, you know, is that going to be like a stern talking to? Maybe by him, maybe also by Robbie. I mean, if she keeps escalating this, if she keeps trying to poke the bear, like, and she does it a couple times in this episode. I mean, one, she doesn't really explain what she's talking about, but she's asking about getting the drugs out of the cabinet and how that works and all that. And then the other ones where she actually brings up her concerns. It kind of feels like it feels like she has the biggest chance of completely having the worst day out of all the young characters. It feels like she's so headstrong that she might come crashing down the most and have like the biggest tragedy of the day. And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean like she'll lose a bunch of patience. I mean, she might, it's possible. But more just from a character perspective, it feels like she might learn the harshest lessons and realize that she's maybe burning bridges with the people she's working with for reasons that aren't even all that convincing. And again, I don't think we, the audience, have seen very much evidence. And even that one scene where she disagreed with what he was doing in the scene because it didn't fit the textbook examples, it never felt like he was being, like, I don't know, reckless. It never felt like he wasn't doing something because he wanted to try something radical because it would make him look cool or anything. As much as he's got a bit of a cocky demeanor when he's like around people and whatnot, everything felt like it was coming from a complete place of experience and confidence. It's like, no, this is how this works. He knows his craft, he knows what he's doing, and he's trying something that he's learned on the job rather than something that's in a textbook. So even that example that we did get to see didn't feel quite right. And now she's still bickering about the bottle of medication that she couldn't open, right? I think this is what this stems back to. So I don't know. It feels like she's having a really tough time accepting that she's messing up or doesn't know something, and she's kind of looking for reasons to blame someone else. And I don't think it's going to end well for her unless someone really stops her in her tracks and makes her think about what she's doing. So I don't know. We can see where that's going, but yeah. So yeah, it's funny that I started this by saying there was 3 main plot lines, and there was. I do think the girl drowning, I think the old man who used to do the volunteer ambulance service, and the girl who might be a trafficking or a potential trafficking victim. I think those are the 3 main plots of this episode, but there was so much stuff densely packed around it that I was finding myself pivoting into things left and right. And I think the reason why I was pivoting left and right, and this is a good thing, is because so many of those little bits and those other plots were either like setting up characters for how they feel in one of those main plots, or they were showing the effects of how they felt in that main plot, right? You know, just like King reminding us about her relationship with her sister because that was heavily about it, you know, or focused on in that other plot. And then you do the scene in the main plot where, oh, that's suddenly relevant and it's making us think about her character in a way that we wouldn't if we didn't already know that. So, no, good stuff. It's well written, I guess is what I'm saying. To sum it up in a simple phrase, it's a well written show. So there you go, that's episode 8. Obviously I'll be back in a couple of weeks with episode 9 of The Pitt. So let me know what you thought of this one in the comments. Like, subscribe, all that stuff helps out a bunch if you do. Of course, you can support everything over at Patreon or via YouTube membership. Thanks to everyone who already does. Check out Male Fuzz Movies for all the movie podcasts. And that is me. So thank you once again. I'll see you next time. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?